Support comes from St. Louis Public Library Foundation, helping the library serve children and their families with programs and services needed to become lifelong readers. More information about the foundation is at slpl.org.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. This hour, we're exploring a story 34 years in the making. 34 years. That's how long Chris Dunn spent in prison. At age 18, he was labeled a killer, charged for a 1990 murder of a 15-year-old in what appeared to be a gang-related shooting. It was a terrible crime, and everyone involved was so young. The two witnesses who testified against Chris Dunn were children themselves, just 12 and 14 years old. Their testimony was key. It convinced a jury to find Chris Dunn guilty and a judge to sentence him to life in prison with no chance of parole. But the truth is, Chris Dunn is not a murderer. He did not kill anyone in 1990, and it was decades before that truth came out. The legal system took a long time to acknowledge it. It took those two witnesses from his original trial, now grown adults, recanting their testimonies. It took new laws and new prosecutors who would fight for his innocence. It took hope, something that for Chris often felt impossible. And it took no small measure of love from a person who never stopped believing in him. This summer, on July 30th, Chris Dunn walked out of a courthouse in St. Louis a free man. The murder charges against him were officially dropped. At age 52, he began a new life of freedom. Earlier this week, I had a chance to sit down with Chris in our studio to talk about his new chapter of life and the path he's traveled to get there. He was joined by his wife, Kira, who spent decades fighting to prove her husband's innocence. I began by asking Chris about the day of his release on July 30th, 2024, and if he knew at the time that it would be his last day in prison.
No, I didn't.
Okay.
And quite honestly, it was sad because I was on the phone with my wife and we were just talking about the situation that happened 5-6 days prior to that. When the officers came to my room to inform me to pack my property again. But like I said before, I done gave away the majority of my things, so I didn't have too much to pack anymore. I wasn't sure what's about to happen to me. All I knew is that they escorted me out of a prison, inside of a prison van, back to the city in which I come from 34 years before. Mm-hmm. And when I get there, I saw my lawyers. Then I looked to the side and saw my wife. And I'm like, okay, so what's about to happen? I was thinking to myself, seriously, is this about to end? And what was about to begin? And I knew not until I was able to hug her. But I first had to get through a barrage of lawyers and other people which wanted to shake my hand and to congratulate me. I just couldn't wait to get to her. And unfortunately, she had to be the last person I got a chance to hug inside that building. But that changed my perspective of what was about to happen. And I'm thinking to myself, this is real. Mm-hmm. So it changed it.
Kira, what was that day like for you? You know, Chris has described not knowing what was going on.
Right.
But you understood what was happening. What was that day like?
Well, to be honest, I didn't know what was going to happen until maybe an hour before Chris was led out of his cell. My youngest sister-in-law and I had gone down to Rolla to sit in a coffee shop and wait. We would have been closer to the prison, but there's really nowhere to wait in Licking. It's so small. So I didn't know if anything would happen, but I had a feeling it would. And if it did, I didn't want to have to make another panicked 2.5 hour drive from St. Louis like I had the week prior. So I believe it was when we were sitting in the coffee shop, we got the call that, something's going to happen. And they'd been updating us. When I say they, I mean the legal team all day. And they said, it's going to happen, but we don't know. They're releasing him. Like, are you sure? And they didn't know from where. Perhaps the prison, perhaps. So we hightailed it down there as quickly as possible. But by the time we got there, I'd already gotten a call, and indeed the prison staff confirmed that they weren't going to let us take him. For some reason, they wanted to take him to St. Louis. So again, I was happy, but not quite happy, not quite ready to believe it until I saw him actually walk free. And so we ran back to St. Louis, kind of hoped to follow the van, didn't get a chance. They know what they're doing. They know how to evade people. So we ended up, however, by coincidence, right behind them as they approached downtown St. Louis. And they took him into the parking bay, and we weren't sure if they were going to release him there or anywhere inside, or if they were going to keep him, or if they were, So it was still very uncertain until that moment that Chris just mentioned, when I actually walked in, and among the throng of people, I saw Chris actually walking with his own 2 feet, no handcuffs, just as a free person. And that was when I actually believed it too.
Mm-hmm. So that incredulity, I would imagine that it took some time to get over that, even after you left the courthouse. The day after your release, Chris, what did you do?
Wow. I woke up and stared out of the hotel window from the 5th floor and just took it in. This is my first time seeing St. Louis through a window other than a television set. And even though it was the county of St. Louis, still, it was St. Louis. And we still didn't believe that this was actually true. So we playfully pieced each other just to see if it was actually reality. Then we decided to get up and go downstairs for breakfast. And we're still pinching ourselves trying to figure out if this is true. I mean, we understand this is reality. This is not a Matrix situation, but at the same time, but we're still taking it in.
Yeah.
Because right now, I still feel like a child being reborn into a world in which I've lost all contact from. And things have changed since then. St. Louis, I know the streets of St. Louis, but everything looked completely different for me. So taking everything in the day that I got out, it's like right now, I'm still taking it in.
What did you notice in the world around you?
The smells, the sounds. For the past 15 years, I sat in Licking Correctional Center. There was no trees around us. There was a hot, stale wind that you could feel. There's a diesel plant next door to it. There's another place that's next door that burns wood. And the ground itself is hot. So when I got out and I got a chance to feel the wind on my face, listen to the birds sing, the barks of the dogs in the alleys, that was new. That was like my touch of reality returning back to me. And I was thinking to myself the other day, I don't ever want to know what it's like to not experience those sounds or those smells again in life. I don't.
So that was the first day.
That was the first day.
Kira, you had prepared several times for Chris's first day of freedom. Mm-hmm. And those times before July 30th, they ended in disappointment. I remember one of the times that we spoke, you talked about preparing clothes, right? Talk to us about what it was like to look so forward to that first day and come so close yet to be so far.
Well, I felt foolish. I felt foolish for having thought that we could win. I mean, it seemed that here we'd come so far with 2 declarations of innocence from 2 judges and the support of 2 prosecutors, which is still quite a rare thing, especially in Missouri, and it had been snatched away from us yet again. And I felt foolish. I thought, why did I ever think that Chris could come home and that he could be free? This is Missouri.
The relationship between you, Kira, and Chris, it goes back many, many years. And all of those obstacles that you faced together started with your meeting back in 1999. I'd like to rewind to that point. And Kira, at that time, you were 29 years old.
Yes.
And a volunteer with a magazine called Justice Denied. And then you got an assignment to write about a man named Christopher Dunn. So what was your impression of the case at that time, Kira?
Well, at the time, my first move was to learn about the case by reading the documentation that had been provided. And that included the trial transcript, any police reports or police interview transcripts, and other filings that had been done since then. But when I first dove into the documentation, what really caught my attention was the disparity between the trial transcripts in terms of what the witnesses said and what they had told the police during those initial interviews. Very different between the 2 boys. But when they did make it to court, their answers had changed and they matched. Mm-hmm. Everything matched. And I saw, too, that Chris's attorney at the time, public defender at the time, hadn't brought that out. Didn't object, didn't say, hey, this isn't what you said before. And I didn't understand why. Mm-hmm. So overall, it brought up more questions for me as to, how did this even happen? And luckily, Chris has always been 100% candid and asked people to ask questions. He welcomes all questions and inquiries.
So, Chris, as you were talking with Kira, was there something about her that, at that point, you'd spoken with other reporters? How was Kira different from the rest?
Well, to be completely honest with you, I didn't trust Kira at first because through my whole experience, I got to that point in which everyone who has let me down was a woman. And I grew up in a household with nothing but women. And I love my family. But when it comes to the system, my trial attorney, their investigators, you name it, it was involved in it. I got to that point, I just didn't trust anymore. And even after my conviction, they appointed women attorneys to represent me. And those women, all 3 of them, done the exact same thing. So when it got to Kira, it wasn't like off the bat that I was going to trust her. There was something that I believe that you had to earn because of everything I just went through. But it was a elderly woman from North Carolina who first initially contacted the organization where Kira comes from. Mm-hmm. And she asked me, my name was Beth Michaels, and she asked me to give her a chance to tell her the story. And over the months, and I mean months, she and I corresponded. So I started to see that she genuinely cared about the story being told the correct way. So I started to tell her not just what she needed to hear, but what should have been said a long time ago. Mm. And I opened up the doors and allowed her to meet people that can tell her the story from their perspective, not just mine. So this way, it's not just what I said to you, it's what you hear from everybody else now. Mm.
Kira, what was it about Chris then that made you put in more work than would go into just another, quote unquote, just another article for the magazine?
Well, as I mentioned before, Chris's willingness and to answer, but not just willingness, but his invitation of more questions, saying, look, I have nothing to hide nor lie to you about. You know, please ask me this. I'd be happy to show you that. And also because I was able to contact a prior public defender and speak with him. And that was after Chris had been convicted that he helped. That just allowed me to really develop the story. But then because I was so compelled by what I found out, I didn't want to just leave it once I published. I had also been volunteering there for a little over a year, and I had a day job, had children. It was unpaid, and I was nearing the end of my time that I was able to put that time aside regularly to volunteer. So when I did have to let the organization know, hey, I can't keep doing this, I definitely wanted to keep advocating for Chris. So we continued to do so. We continued to correspond. I made a trip out to talk to Chris, to talk to some people. And honestly, Chris is an amazing writer as well as an artist. And I started feeling closer to Chris as time went on, as a friend. I mean, he has an amazing heart. I felt that I was able to share what was going on in my life. He did the same. And so it was not overnight. It took years, but we developed a very close friendship.
Mm-hmm. And it involves food too, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
So, yes, when I did start visiting Chris more often, they allowed food visits for certain tiers of the institution. If a person had been doing well, not gotten in any trouble for a while, you could have a food visit. So I first asked Chris what he wanted, and then once we got that out of the way, I started bringing stuff from all over the world. And we would ask our youngest child, what do you think he'd like? And he would come up with all kinds of ideas too. So yes, there was food, I think, that elicited really good responses, and then an artichoke dip, which notably elicited the worst response I've ever seen.
Chris, you're shaking your head now even.
Yes. But when I was going through St. Louis, I would almost always stop to get a chicken St. Paul sandwich.
Oh.
That was a must.
Okay.
And of all the foods I brought over the years from every culture I could find in California that sold food, I think chicken St. Paul still has a special place in Chris's heart.
We need to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue listening to my conversation with Chris Dunn. This summer, he became a free man after spending 34 years in prison. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. Let's return to my conversation with Chris and Kira Dunn. The couple met while Chris was serving a life sentence for murder in St. Louis in 1990, a crime Chris always maintained he did not commit. This summer, a judge ordered Chris's release. Chris, in 2008, you devised a pretty ingenious way to propose to Kira, and it involved bumps.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Okay. Those bumps that you're referring to are the American system of Braille. Mm-hmm. And I have known sign language as well as Braille since I probably, 11 to 12 years of age. But it was a surprise. So what I did, I drew 4 portraits. And on the back of each portrait of the children, I asked her, will you be my wife or will you marry me? But she didn't get it off the top. Okay. She didn't realize that at first. So I had to explain to her what she got to do. But she's a smart cookie. So she didn't crumble that quick. So she flipped them over. She had to look at them. Then she looked it up herself to figure out what it said. And then, we made the decision.
Okay. So it was a little bit of a mystery there.
Yes.
So the two of you recently celebrated your 10th anniversary, and it was the first one that you were able to celebrate outside prison. How did you mark it, Kira?
Well, we got an Airbnb in the tiny town of Joshua Tree out in the desert, and went there with the intention of being able to see the Milky Way and all the stars and the satellites and everything. Turned out it was cloudy.
Okay.
But we still were able to visit Palm Springs, which had a mountain and a tram that actually goes to the top of the mountain. So we had that awesome experience. We did other things in town. Because what it is like now is everything we do is almost all firsts.
Right.
Not everything. We've been to the store a few times, but everything else, it's like, gosh, this is the first time we've done this together, isn't it? Wow, this is the first time. So we went to our first farmer's market. I think we went to our first breakfast place. We just enjoyed each other's company in this tiny little cabin in the middle of the desert.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you made your own stars.
Yeah, there you go.
In spite of the clouds.
Well said.
And Chris, for you, I think I saw a photo of you in a hammock.
Oh, yeah.
That's it.
First hammock.
Enjoying
hammock.
some of that.
That's Joshua Tree.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you like the hammock?
Oh, yes, I
Yeah.
do.
And, I mean, things like getting to take naps whenever you want, to relax and kind of maybe not be thinking about schedules. Is that something new for you as well?
I've said this over time, and I think one of the best things, other than being able to move about freely, about my release is that I don't have to be counted. I don't have to stand and be counted by an officer. I can finally sit down when I want to, walk out the door when I want to. Those things right there, the small things are the best things that we actually take for granted, but we're going to miss the most. Mm-hmm. And still to this day, get ready to tell you, I've caught myself laying on the floor other than the bed. Mm-hmm. And she didn't crawl out the bed and laid on the floor with me because for 34 years, a prison bunk was all I knew. And my body got so used to it that it kind of somewhat rejected the comfort of a bed. So I'm grateful for every little moment I have with her. And as long as I get the opportunity to, as they say, smell the roses and appreciate the flowers while I'm above the ground, I'm going to enjoy every moment that I possibly can.
Mm-hmm. Chris, I would like to hear you talk about what your journey to the seat in front of me has been like. And we talked a bit about how you met Kira in the late 1990s, how you got to know each other over the next decade. And then there was something else that happened In 2005, that was a kind of turning point among many turning points in your story. That year, you received a piece of mail that was sent to you by another inmate, and it contained a legal document. It was an affidavit from one of the witnesses who testified in your murder trial back in 1991. Now, those two witnesses were 12 and 14 years of age at the time of trial. And this letter, written 15 years later, basically said that the person who wrote the letter, that he lied about you, Chris, that you were not the shooter, and, quote, I and God know it. What was it like to receive that communication?
It was an affidavit from Demore Stepp, the young man that was, 14 years of age when he testified against me. I read it. I didn't believe it. But then I wrote Kira. I told her about it. By this time now, they transferred me and sent me back to JCCC. Kira and I, we talked about it, and she contacted another attorney by the name of Susan Kister. Susan took the case, and then she went to go visit the witness, talk to him. He confirmed the exact same thing. Her investigator went to talk to him, confirmed the same thing. But sadly, he's one of those young men who's trying to get a deal himself. He was still trying to work his way out the system. So we had to wait to figure out what was going to happen. But I knew by being in a library since 1990 that one witness wasn't going to be enough. It was a toss-up. You was going to need both of them. So years passed before we were able to find the other. But how to describe what it felt like? It's like staring at hope in the face, but not being able to actually see it. Mm-hmm. So we waited.
So if we move forward in time to 2020, at that point, both witnesses, Chris, in your case, they recant their testimony. And without physical evidence of any kind, there's now nothing that is connecting you to the 1990 murder. And a Missouri judge, William Hickel, states as much. He says, this court does not believe that any jury would now convict Christopher Dunn under these facts. Now you're hearing this, Chris, in prison. What was going through your mind, maybe even through your body, as you hear the judge say that?
I felt betrayed again. I felt betrayed by the very system that placed me in this situation in the first place. No matter how many politicians will sit there and tell you or tell any citizen that they actually care about right and wrong and see the problem but choose not to do anything about it, is a hypocrite to me. And that hypocrite will stare you in the face and tell you all day that they give a damn about you, but don't. And here it is, I had to sit there. And I felt like a hope that I was looking at, it drained from my body. And I was lost. I didn't know what to do because the law itself, it didn't make no sense to me. Because how can you be declared innocent but still remain in prison? So I had to sit there and figure out what would be our next step. So I had to sit there and talk to my best friend, and she and I sat there and figured out what we were going to go from that point.
Mm-hmm. Now, by the time 2023 comes, things are looking up for you, and your case for innocence is strong. And there's also a relatively new state law passed in 2021 that gives local prosecutors the power to look back at old cases, and if those are wrongful convictions, to vacate them. And that was a big change. So 2023, the top prosecutor here in St. Louis, Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner, does just that with your case, files a motion to vacate. Now, that was on May 15th, 2023, that Gardner announces this, but she resigned from her office days later, which then is yet another setback in your case. But Kira, for you, as the best friend Chris was talking about earlier, as Chris's wife, what was it like to get support from Kim Gardner only to see all of this falling apart of her office after she has filed the motion to vacate?
Well, it was devastating. We had come so far in finally proving Chris's innocence, only to find that it didn't matter in Missouri. And our only hope at that point was Miss Gardner's support. And to get that support, we were far from the only ones who would have liked to have it. And to have her actually file that motion to dismiss was like being struck by lightning twice. I mean, we were so fortunate, and we were so grateful to her. And to have that taken away was like going back to square one.
Mm-hmm. Chris, you had to wait another 9 months for there to be movement. And in February of this year, Gabe Gore, who is the new circuit attorney of St. Louis, who was appointed by Governor Mike Parson, Gabe Gore announces that he agrees with what Kim Gardner had done in your case, that you were wrongfully convicted. With all that has happened, did you allow yourself to have some hope in that moment? Like a different kind of hope? This is the second circuit attorney of St. Louis to say, this conviction is not right.
Prior to him actually making a decision, to be honest with you, I did not have that hope. And when Gabe Gore made that decision originally to pull back what Kim Gardner did, it bothered me. But my wife had to explain to me that you got to give him a chance. Because he's taking on a task that a lot of people is looking for him to fail. They was hoping that he failed. And a lot of people was really throwing this case in front of him, hoping that he either failed and it'd blow up in his face. They did not know that Gabe Gore was smarter than he looked. Gabe Gore literally took it out of his own hands and appointed Judge Draper to oversee the Conviction Integrity Unit, as well as to hire an independent investigator who was a lawyer who once served on the same circuit, which was Judge Booker T. Shaw. Mm-hmm. So that was probably one of the smartest things he done. What he did for me about believing in the case and coming forward with, he believed in justice. It wasn't that he believed in me. He believed that I was wrong and the system will continue to be wrong if this law continued to be upheld. Mm.
Not long after the announcement comes out about Gabriel Gore agreeing with Kim Gardner, you spoke with St. Louis on the Air producer Danny Wysentowski, whom you've spoken with a number of times over the last couple of years, and you used a metaphor to describe what it was like for you at that point to contemplate hope.
It's like trying to visualize hope being introduced to justice. If the two ever met, what would they say to each other if they saw me? I never saw justice before. I never seen hope. So I wouldn't know what the two looked like if they were staring at me dead in my face. And to sit in prison after hearing it for the third time, to vacate, is a relief, sure. But I still have to live in prison with the uncertainty that I may possibly die in prison.
Chris, that's you talking from prison in February this year. Listening to that now, from this studio, across from me, finally, what stands out to you, hearing what we just heard right now? What are you reminded of?
I'm reminded that each day that we live is priceless. And even though you and I sit across from one another, and I get to see Danny and shake his hand for the very first time, which is an honor, even though I get to wake up and see my wife every day, I still have to remember there's hundreds, if not thousands, of others still in prison waiting to see what hope looks like. They know what I look like. I'm hope to them right now. But they still don't understand what the concept of hope really is either, because they're still fighting their battle.
Just 2 months ago, a judge ordered your release, and we said we would come back to Missouri's Attorney General, Andrew Bailey. Andrew Bailey intervened at the very last moment, and he opposed your release. Now, Chris, I understand that at that point, you were in civilian clothes and ready to go.
Right.
So to be again turned back, Kira, at this point, where is it that you are finding strength to get through yet another reversal of hope?
I just dropped back into the same old groove of we're going to keep fighting. It doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter how this turns out. We don't know anything really except one thing, and that is we're going to keep fighting. The day that this happened and I walked into the prison I don't know what for. I mean, I'd been told what was happening, that the Supreme Court had issued the stay, that Chris was not coming home, that all of us in the parking lot had to just leave without him. And I was able to speak with the warden. She was standing there. I had no idea who she was. I hadn't met her before. And I said, I'm Kira Dunn. I'm just here to, I'm trying to understand what's going on. And she introduced herself and she told me. And I thanked her and I said, am I able to see my husband? I'm probably not, am I? And she said, you know what, you are. And she allowed me in to see Chris. And the minute I saw him, he was just a shell. I've seen him through many visits over many years, and there was just no light in his eyes. He was slumped down, and it was the lowest I'd ever seen him. And I felt the same way. In the brief few minutes we were allowed to have with each other, I told him, you're coming home. This is another bump in the road of a very, very long road, but you are coming home. And we just sat there and held on to each other, held each other's hands, and we reverted back to that, holding on to each other through no matter what comes, all the ups and downs, and vowing to continue the fight.
We need to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue this conversation. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. let's return to my conversation with Chris Dunn. He was released from prison earlier this summer after spending more than 30 years in prison for a murder he did not commit. Along with Chris, I spoke with Kira Dunn, his wife and longtime advocate. So Chris, today, it is 34 years since the 1990 murder of 15-year-old Rico Rogers. And you are 52 years old now. There is still that murder of a 15-year-old boy. And he was fatally shot in the Wells Goodfellow neighborhood of North St. Louis. What is it that remains with you about that shooting?
I mean, other than the fact that he and I we will always be connected in some sense or another, because his life was taken and my freedom was taken. Even though I don't know Rico, I had to learn about Rico since my incarceration. Now, whatever situations he were in before my arrest, I had nothing to do with it. But the thing, it's those that was down on, 1200 Clark Street. It was their responsibility to listen to the people and hear and read all the details. Everything that they wanted to overlook, which could have led them to the actual perpetrator who committed the crime. But they chose not to do that for whatever political reason, whatever personal reasons. They chose to come after me. Rico Rogers' family deserved justice. His murder is still gone unsolved.
Are there any final thoughts that you would like to share about this very long journey to freedom that you have been on? Kira, because you've been on the show with us before, is there something that you would like for people to know or to understand?
I would say that it's surreal just to sit here and do an interview with my husband. You guys were so kind to allow us to talk about the case on your show and get it out into the public's awareness, and to be able to come back and not only see you all in person, but to see him sitting right there is a surreal experience all of its own. Mm-hmm. I would say that if there are others, and I know there are other family members out there who have people they're supporting and they know they're innocent, they're just not able to prove it. Perhaps they don't have the funds, perhaps they don't have the support or even the documentation that they need to prove it. Don't give up. Never give up. I still wake up every morning and yeah, he's still there. Okay. Mm-hmm. This is still happening. It's not a dream. But I didn't think it ever would. Setback after setback, and so many years went by until, as I said before, the only thing we knew was that we wouldn't stop trying. We wouldn't give up. We didn't know how the winds would blow. We didn't know if we would ever find the path forward, because, as I said, there were so many obstacles. But if there are people out there who know your loved one is innocent, don't stop reaching out. Don't stop trying to get some attention on the story, because sometimes that's what it takes. And so if you who are listening are in that situation and you need to escalate, then do that. There are people out here who care. There are people who will talk about your situation and get the right eyes on it.
And Chris, any final thoughts?
Yesterday, I walked out of the prison. I traveled, which my wife has a video of it. Mm-hmm. I traveled back to the very prison that didn't want to let me go at first, and took my shoes off, my socks off, and walked out the front door of the prison and walked off the prison property barefooted. For all those who never got the opportunity to to walk out of prison themselves. And there was 8 people, technically 9, who actually pulled me to the side when I first entered prison. They knew about my case. They didn't want to see me mess up my life. So they took me to the side and forced me to go to school because I didn't get the chance to graduate from high school because I got locked up before I could. And I ended up getting my GED, and I became a tutor for 9 years. And then I started working in the law library. So for those who's still in prison right now, who's still fighting to be free, this is my way of telling them I'm still walking with you and feeling the same pain. That phone call you heard is one of 73 people that's on my phone that I actually talk to on a daily basis that's still in prison. Because I don't want them to think that I got out and left them behind like everybody else who got out and forgot them there. There are many people who believe that their loved ones are actually innocent. But they feel that their voices are not heard because no one who is anyone that has the power to do anything about it is listening. We've been disappointed. We've been let down. But we could not stay down ourselves. We had to fight. You have to fight. And if it wasn't for you, St. Louis Public Radio, Tony Messenger, Deion Broxton, if it wasn't for people like Danny, our stories would never be heard. They would never reach the ears of the people who need to hear what we have to say. Because I suffered and I needed to voice myself. And it wasn't until you all gave us that platform, gave me that opportunity to be heard, for people to actually start listening. So, like my wife said, if there's any family members out there who's questioning how to help or do anything for their own, they first got to ask themselves, what are they willing to do? If they got to get out, campaign, treat each case like they're running for office themselves. If they're unsatisfied with the law or the system itself, they have to go out there and change it. I'm not saying go out there and be a rowdy rouser, but go out there and vote. Go out there and make your pot thicken by digging up the soil and tending to it and replanting the seeds that you actually want in the ground so it can grow the fruit that you need to survive with. And me and my wife, we're willing to help anybody, as well as expose the situation for what it needs to be. And we're going to do whatever we can to continue to advocate for those whom in which cannot speak for themselves or can fight for themselves. We don't know exactly what all it is, but we know what we've done to get to where we are right now. And we thank you for giving us this opportunity today.
This episode was produced by Danny Wissentowski.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.